the well-mannered assassin is still trying to stir his accomplices. Jacob Rees-Mogg was at the launch of the latest Brexit group paper, explaining why no one should fear leaving the EU without a deal.
A free trade agreement is much, much more important than a customs union.
Mr Rees-Mogg warned colleagues who hadn't yet joined his uprising against Theresa May they could be stuck with her for years if they don't act now.
Getting the 48 letters is shown to be quite difficult. So the idea that in a year you'd just repeat the process and then she'd get at that point, I don't think that's realistic. I think it is now, or the Prime Minister will lead the Conservatives to the next election. And you find MPs privately who will say to you they think that's a really good idea in any number, and I'd be quite surprised.
Cabinet ministers, including the new Brexit secretary, met this morning. One said there was little pushback about the deal. It was like the steam had gone out of it. The Chief Whip last week told ministers he thought the DUP MPs would abstain and the vote would get through. This week, one minister said he spoke in generalities.
It's a really exciting week, and I think Prime Minister's going to have a very busy time.
There's a possibility of renegotiating parts of the withdrawal agreement, or is it only the political declaration?
There's a focus on getting the deal done. She'll get the deal done, and then in a few weeks' time, I've got a job to do in Parliament.
In the last few days, former ministers have been calling in here urging a rewrite of the whole deal. Current ministers trying to get tweaks to the language in the political declaration about the future relationship. But could some redrafting win over backbench rebels? Might they crumble if Theresa May puts the vote a second time after a defeat?
I'm too old battle horse to be persuaded by bits of paper.
It's not going to swing you to burn you off. And neither is the pressure if she loses the first vote and comes back a second time.
Well, she can't do that. That'd be crazy. Make her look extremely foolish. But it certainly wouldn't.
It's live. It'd be very much under consideration at the moment.
Well, it's like the European countries or Ireland who came back for a second referendum. It's just crazy. I mean, if you lose the vote, you'll lose the second vote too, by a bigger amount, I suspect, and she'll look very foolish doing it.
Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon was allowed to slip into a Whitehall office to read the latest draft of the political declaration before meeting with the leaders of the smaller parties in Westminster, in the very offices the SNP big-footed the Lib Dems out of after the 2015 election.
Well, obviously I was given the opportunity to read the latest draft of the political declaration on conditions of strict confidentiality, so I'm not going to breach that. I think, as everybody would anticipate, the political declaration, which unlike the withdrawal agreement is not a legally binding document, is a pretty vague list of aspirations.
The DUP was the only party missed out of this round of talks. The pact its 10 MPs have with the government to give it a majority appears tonight to be hanging by a thread.
Well, the common supply arrangement is still in place. However, we have shown that we are not so bound to it that we will accept anything being thrust at us or will accept any betrayal, whatever the government decides it wants to do.
Tomorrow, the Prime Minister heads to Brussels, hoping to nail down last details of a deal long in the making, but right now, without anything like enough friends to pass through the Commons.
And the former Cabinet Minister Justine Greening, who's backed calls for a second referendum on the Brexit deal, joins me from Westminster now. Justine Greening, are there any circumstances in which you would back Theresa May's deal as it currently stands?
No, I think it's a bad deal for Britain. It's not in this country's interest. It gives away control rather than taking it back. And I think it'll lose its influence not just in Europe but around the world.
Even if that means that you're heading for a no deal, potentially?
I don't believe we are heading for a no deal, but the bottom line is that Parliament works on majorities. And there is no majority for the Prime Minister's deal, as we've seen with the challenge that Brexiteers have had getting their 48 letters. There's no majority for a no-deal Brexit either.
No majority for your second referendum plan?
Well, Parliament is at gridlock, and what I'm proposing is a route out of that gridlock. If you can't go further forward, you have to find a different route, and that is the route that we'll end up having to take. And I think what we need to do on behalf of the country is now end this pantomime. We could spend another 3 weeks, we could spend another 3 months arguing about the right route forward, but we know what those three choices are. It's either the Prime Minister's deal, it is leaving with essentially no deal, or it's staying with the current deal we've got. The public should now have the right to choose.
But if you have the second referendum, you could end up with yet more months, if not years, of pantomime, and you could end up with exactly the same result and exactly the same gridlock.
Well, I think people know what the real choices are ahead of them now. They've got some absolutely clear-cut deals on the table. I think if it takes us a few more months, but we get the right direction forward for Britain, then it's absolutely worth it. But what I do know is that Parliament can't just put its head in the sand collectively and ignore the fact that there is gridlock here. We have to be honest with the British people, and we have to find an alternative route through. And that's what I'm proposing, an alternative plan that can actually break that Brexit gridlock.
And what if you end up with exactly the same result? Brexit and the EU puts the same deal on the table. What then?
Well, if people want the Prime Minister's deal, it doesn't really matter whether I don't think it's a good choice for Britain. I think it should be for the nation to decide what's in the national interest. That's what I'm saying, is give people their own choice, because Parliament will not be able to take that choice for them. It is gridlock. We should stop pretending it isn't, and then find an alternative route through. And I think in the end, we're going to have to recognise that the only route through this gridlock is to give people a second referendum and allow them to pick themselves, because it's clear that MPs here cannot agree.
But the other option, of course, is to do some kind of government of national unity, get together with the opposition parties and come up with a deal.
Well, again, I don't think there is, as it were, the time. The Prime Minister has herself put a huge amount of energy into getting what she thinks is the best deal for Britain. I think we've reached the end of that process. We could spend months and years continuing to renegotiate. We've got a deal from the EU. That's what's on the table. My point is Parliament here is not going to find a way through that gridlock. So we have to allow people to do that for themselves. And that's why I think in the end, the final say on this needs to be to give the British people the choice between those three alternative courses for our country.
And by voting down Theresa May's deal, as you're clear you would do, you're part of Jacob Rees-Mogg or Captain Mannering's little brigade. You're on the same side. You're happy with that?
I'm on the side of what's in the national interest, and I'm not part of the European Research Group. Actually, my personal view is that it's a mistake to leave the EU, and I would prefer us to remain. But my point is this place here in Parliament is now at gridlock. I said that earlier in the summer. It's proving to be the case. It works on majorities, and there isn't a majority of MPs in favour of anything. We have to go somewhere as a country, and that's why the only route through this gridlock is this alternative that I'm setting out, which is a second referendum.
And can Theresa May take you through that gridlock and on into a next election? Are you happy for her to do that?
Well, I hope that the government will recognise that that's where we're at. I think it's time to stop wasting time. We could have MPs arguing with their very dug-in positions over the coming weeks and months. It's not going to get this country any further forward. We have to find a way to break this logjam.
Okay.
I think if the Prime Minister's prepared to do that, that would be the right thing.
OK, Justine Greening, thank you very much for joining us. Well, joining me in the studio now is the Justice Minister, Lucy Fraser. Minister, you heard Justine Greening there. I know you joined late in the interview, but at the top she said, you know, that a second referendum is the only way to get through this gridlock. Doesn't she have a point on that?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to start with the deal. So the Prime Minister has spent a long time negotiating a deal, and that deal, I think it's important to understand what that deal delivers, because it delivers, first of all, the vote to leave. So we will be leaving in March 2019. People said that they didn't want immigration, uncontrolled immigration, and it delivers on that because there will be free movement of people. People said they didn't want us to continue paying in, and it delivers on that. And people said, after we leave, we don't want the control of the European Court of Justice, and it delivers on that. So
interesting, though, the words you chose there start with this deal, implying that if the Commons does vote it down, as looks very, very likely now, given the numbers, that you could then back a second referendum.
I'm sorry, when I said we should start this deal, I wanted to start by outlining what the deal on the table, and we must remember it is the only deal that is on the table. So, as Justine said, there are three choices before us. There's the deal, and that's the only deal that the EU are willing to do and that we can do in the time frame. There is leaving, or there is remaining in the EU. And I think...
And none of those command a majority in Parliament. Therefore, there's gridlock. So Justine Greening says, put it back to the people.
Well, we haven't had the vote yet. So there isn't gridlock yet. The Prime Minister, first of all, has set out very comprehensively what the implementation period, the transition arrangement will involve. And she set out in a short document how she sees and the EU sees the future framework. But she's going this weekend to Brussels to flesh out more detail on that future framework. And I think we should look and see what that future framework holds. So I don't think, and people may well be persuaded when they see what the future looks like in the deal. So I don't
How
think
are you going to
there's gridlock
persuade people who are supposed to be in partnership with you, or at least propping you up? The DUP, I've been looking at this agreement between yourselves and the Democratic Unionist Party, otherwise known as the Confidence and Supply deal. Does that deal still exist? Because they're not voting with you tonight.
Well, the DUP said this morning that they stand by the confidence and supply.
Well, how do they do that? Because here it says the DUP agrees to support the government on all motions of confidence and on the Queen's speech, the budget, finance bills, money bills. It's not happening, is it?
Well, as I said, the DUP reiterated this morning that they continue to respect the supply agreement.
How does that tally with what I've just read you?
Well, we haven't yet voted on Brexit, and that was a key part of the
You're
Brexit
voting on the finance
arrangement.
bill, though, at the moment, aren't you, on the budget?
That's right, we are.
And they're not with you. So I'm just puzzling to see why the government agreed to give Northern Ireland £1 billion of taxpayers' money, which is what the DUP wanted, in return for their support, which they've now pulled from you.
You're right, the government did agree to give the money. The Prime Minister has worked incredibly hard to ensure that there is no hard border in Ireland, that the customs arrangement is right for Ireland. And so I hope that when she comes back on Sunday and they see the further arrangements in relation to the future deal, that the result will be a good one.
And if they keep on pulling support from you, shouldn't you look at pulling that £1 billion?
Well, I hope that they will continue to support. As I said, the Prime Minister has worked extremely hard to ensure that we get the right deal for Ireland. She's been incredibly clear from the outset that the union was important, that we're the Conservative and Unionist Party, and that we wanted to stay.
But can you be clear with me that if they're not respecting that deal there, they shouldn't get the taxpayers' money up to £1 billion?
Well, as I said, the DUP have confirmed this morning that they will respect.
They're not doing it, though, so should they be getting the money?
Let's see.
Would you like to look at that money being, put back on the table?
What I would like is to ensure that we get the best deal for the British people. And I think the key issue at the moment is that we respect the referendum and we walk away from Europe protecting jobs and making sure that we have certainty. When I speak to constituents, yes, they want whatever they voted for, but they also want certainty. They want to know what the situation is so that they can continue with their businesses and secure their jobs.
In a nutshell, what's at stake if the DUP, Conservative rebels, don't fall into line behind Theresa May's deal?
Well, I think what's at stake is uncertainty and risk. And I think what we want in this country and what people, what we should deliver for people, we've had a negotiation for a number of years, and what we need to deliver is certainty.